Unveiled. The incredible and surprising truth behind the most controversial king in history. Daniel McFarlane stared at the crumbling map of France on his classroom wall, its faded colors mocking him with every tick of the clock. Unveiled, he whispered to himself, echoing the title of his nascent project, an exploration of the enigmatic king, Louis XIV. The irony danced on his lips. While he was captivated by the tales of grandeur, he felt the weight of his own insignificance pressing down like an anchor. Other teachers basked in accolades for their groundbreaking projects. Meanwhile, Daniel's voice dissolved into the chatter of more prestigious accomplishments, as predictable as the dingy textbooks lining his shelves. With each lesson, he stood before young faces yearning for inspiration, yet he couldn't shake the spirit of mediocrity that enveloped him. The battle between ambition and the suffocating reality of his role gnawed at his insides. What if he could provoke curiosity, ignite passion? What if the sensational truths he had unearthed in his grandfather's old journal could change everything for him? Yet that very thought filled him with dread. What if they were all just fragmentary tales, echoing the family legacy he wasn't sure he belonged to? As the sound of rain drummed against the window, his mind spiraled deeper. The obscurity of his unremarkable life confronted him, boiling down to this. He lacked the courage to step into the light. Was he really destined to whisper history in a world of shout? His heart faltered under the notion that perhaps his grandfather's journal held shocking revelations about Louis XIV that could elevate his status from a humble teacher to a noted historian. Yet, could he find within himself the strength to confront his colleagues and push against the tide of dismissal that surrounded him? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Each local history meeting saw him armed with nothing but snippets of his findings. The more he shared, the thicker the skepticism became. Whispers of doubt swirled around him like a chilling fog, gnawing at his ambition. Is he really seeking truth, or is it just his desperate need for validation? The faces in the crowd mirrored his inner turmoil, some deep in conversation, others rolling their eyes or whispering behind raised hands. Every dismissal felt like an arrow piercing his heart, the anxiety wrapping tighter around him. The truth he longed to express was drowning in his fear of inadequacy. What if he misrepresented his grandfather? What if his aspirations led him into a quagmire of professional disgrace? As tension built within him, he felt trapped, uncertain. Daniel glanced at his family, supportive yet unaware of the storm raging in his soul. Could he risk everything for revelations that might not even be rightfully claimed? The silence was deafening, an impending crash lingering in the air. With trembling hands, he clutched the diary, the faded leather still warm with the spirit of a man he never truly knew. Daniel was on the cusp of something monumental, yet he stood paralyzed, torn between honoring his legacy and facing a cascade of rejection. And so he faced the audience, the room heavy with skepticism. Were his discoveries potent enough to silence the doubts, or would they just be another rusted key thrown into the abyss of unrecognized history? Daniel stepped away from the crowded meeting room, feeling the weight of unanswered questions pressing against his chest. Each step echoed in the emptiness of the corridor, amplifying his sense of isolation. Outside, the rain had ceased, leaving the air thick with moisture that curled around him like an unwanted embrace. He was at a crossroads, and while the insights from his grandfather's journal shimmered with promise, a gnawing fear clamped around his throat. What if he stumbled into deeper embarrassment instead of respect? The drive home was a blur, the often familiar route twisting into a haunting reminder of his self-doubt. He arrived and dropped his satchel by the door. The artifacts of his life, his cat, book-filled shelves, and the remnants of neglected hobbies only served to amplify the disparity between his potential and his reality. The evening wore on, shadows stretching across the walls as he pored over his grandfather's journal. Each page felt alive under his fingertips, his grandfather's scrawled words weaving narratives that captivated him, yet left him feeling inadequate. How could he give voice to the extraordinary when he himself felt so ordinary? His mind raced as he reflected on the reactions encountered at the meeting, where the collective skepticism mirrored his internal struggle. The whispers haunted him as he found himself restless on the couch, his eyes drifting over to the bookshelf. Among the well-thumbed volumes lay a collection of works from distinguished historians, their proclamations coloring the world with prestige and notoriety. What did they possess that he didn't? A gleam of realization struck him. They had been brave enough to assert their voices against the tide, to disrupt the narrative even when it felt like they were swimming upstream. But he sat up straighter, a flicker of determination igniting within him. Maybe it wasn't just about absolutes. Perhaps his journey could begin with small, audacious steps. By allowing himself to be vulnerable, by sharing not just the discoveries he esteemed, but also the doubts they invited, he might create a fabric of engagement thicker than ridicule. That night, he resolved to tackle the skepticism head-on. He penned an email to the History Association, requesting to take the lead in the next meeting. He would not come with mere snippets. This time, he would present a cohesive narrative, one woven with the threads of his grandfather's fears and triumphs, illustrating how Louis XIV's legacy paralleled his own uncertainties. Daniel envisioned how the story could unfold, mingling the illustrious life of the king with his own quest for validation. It was both terrifying and liberating. As dawn crept into his small apartment, illuminating the walls that once felt stifling, he felt an unprecedented calm settle in. His heart raced with the rhythm of potential, yet the core of his conviction held steady. He could share both triumph and vulnerability, and through that, draw in even those who were skeptical. With a newfound purpose, he prepared for the upcoming meeting, equipping himself not just with facts, but with personal reflections woven into narratives. He imagined the surprised expressions on the faces of his colleagues, the subtle shifts as they grappled with not only the stories of kings, but the vulnerabilities of a fellow storyteller. But little did he know, as he prepared to take this leap of faith, a challenge loomed on the horizon that would test not just his research, but the very fabric of his resolve. The next meeting would reveal not only the truth of Louis XIV, but the stark reality of Daniel's journey, a clash that might unravel everything he thought he had carefully constructed. Would he be able to stand tall amidst the impending storm, or would it sweep him away into the depths of doubt he'd fought so hard to escape? Daniel arrived at the meeting room, heart thumping audibly against his ribs. He spent countless hours crafting his presentation, blending the historical intricacies of Louis XIV's reign with his own personal struggles. With every stroke of the keyboard, he felt a blend of dread and exhilaration. Today he would share more than just facts. He would reveal part of himself that had always stayed tucked away behind layers of self-doubt. As he entered, the room buzzed with casual conversation, the hum of dissent and excitement threading a complex tapestry. The skepticism he had felt before still flickered in the air, but today he was no longer merely Daniel, the hesitant historian. He was an artist ready to paint his picture with broad strokes, ready to disrupt the status quo that he set up at the front, the projector casting a warm glow on the wall behind him. People took their seats, their faces shifting from casual indifference to a more engaged scrutiny. Daniel cleared his throat, but the lump of anxiety still resided there, demanding attention. Today, I want to talk about Louis XIV, but more importantly, about the courage it takes to own one's narrative. With those words, he felt an eerie calm wash over him, a momentary detachment from the swirling chaos within that he launched into an exploration of France's Sun King, sharing tales of excess and endless ambition, but also drawing parallels to his own journey of wrestling with fears and aspirations. Each point he made felt like a thread being carefully woven together. He spoke candidly about the sharp criticism he feared, about how the terra firma of self-worth shifted beneath him, echoing the pressure Louis faced from noblemen and foreign powers alike. Yet, in the audience's faces, he found signs of something unexpected: curiosity. Their expressions shifted slightly with each new revelation. He could sense interest peaking as he delved deeper into the narrative of Louis XIV's relationships, using them as metaphors for his own struggles to make meaningful connections, to bridge the gap between who he was and who he longed to be recognized as. But as he unveiled his most vulnerable thoughts, he caught sight of a familiar face lurking toward the back of the room. Miriam, a former mentor, whose judgment had always felt like an unyielding weight on his shoulders, sat crossed-armed and skeptical. The familiar urge to retreat washed over him, threatening to dissolve his hard-won confidence. Daniel pressed on, telling the story of how Louis maintained his image while navigating the world of political intrigue. He leveraged storytelling not just as a means to an end, but as a way to connect with his people, reflecting their hopes and dreams. Like him, he directed his gaze to Miriam. I, too, seek to understand my own narrative, to add depth to my identity. After finishing, he felt an uneasy silence linger in the room. The palpable energy poured out from him, a mix of anticipation and dread. He waited for the inevitable critique to strike, fully aware that it was coming, but ready to defend his narrative. Miriam raised her hand, the corner of her mouth slightly twitching. You've spun an interesting narrative, Daniel, but at what point does vulnerability become weakness? The question sliced through the air like a knife, the echo of her disapproval weighing heavily on him. Could what he shared, his uncertainties, be perceived as an insufficiency rather than a strength? He opened his mouth, ready to counteract the idea that authenticity bred weakness, but was halted by a revelation swelling within him. Vulnerability was not weakness. It was precisely the thread that connected him to the audience. Taking a deep breath, he met her gaze with resolve. And at what point does protecting a facade prevent us from genuinely connecting? Without vulnerability, we are just voices in the void. The room froze, and he could see thoughts igniting in the eyes of his peers. Had he shifted their perspective? The confrontation was not merely his. It was a collective awakening. As he concluded, applause erupted. Unexpected and resonant. Daniel allowed the moment to linger, relishing the taste of realization that crisis often births clarity. Yet, in the depths of his excitement, a deeper tension curled at the edges of his mind. He had faced the critical voice that shadowed him, but Miriam's challenge opened up a path that beckoned more confrontation, more growth. As the room buzzed with discussion, he felt the thrill of possibility blooming, but questions rumbled in the background. Would the acknowledgement of his narrative withstand scrutiny? The echoes of ambitious stories could be dangerously disruptive, wrestling him further into the depths of what he truly believed about himself. The next challenge awaited him, not just from external voices, but within the recesses of his own doubts. Would he be ready for what lay ahead, or would the more profound challenges unravel the threads of his newfound confidence? As the applause died down, Daniel stepped down from the stage, his heart still racing. The mingling crowd buzzed with excitement, exchanging thoughts on his presentation, but they felt like distant murmurs against the drumming of his pulse. Every shake of a hand or compliment paid in passing became a brush against his lingering apprehension. Had he truly shifted their perspectives, or had he merely sparked a temporary interest that would fade once the thrill wore off? Miriam's question hovered in his mind like a persistent shadow, nagging at the edges of his newfound resolve. What if vulnerability was, in fact, a weakness? As the audience dispersed, he caught sight of Miriam, still standing near the back, her arms crossed tightly as if to shield herself from the open honesty he had dared to share. Determined not to retreat into self-doubt, he approached her with measured steps. Her eyes, a mix of skepticism and curiosity, locked onto his as he neared. "Can we talk?" he asked, voice steady despite the whirlwind inside. "About what? Your newfound bravado?" She replied, a hint of sardonic delight in her tone. "About the fear of being vulnerable," he replied, maintaining eye contact. "About how it feels to share pieces of yourself and then question whether you're enough." For a fleeting moment, Miriam's expression softened. "Let me ask you this. Do you think vulnerability is always valuable, or could it lead others to see you as less competent?" Her question rekindled the pressure in Daniel's chest. He could feel the familiar riptide of self-doubt beginning to pull at him, but he forced himself to remain grounded. "I think it's both. It can be risky, but if we don't share who we are, we risk isolation. I'm tired of feeling invisible. I want to carve out a presence in this space." Miriam's eyes narrowed slightly, a calculated assessment. "So, you're saying that being real is more important than being seen as competent?" "Yes," he exclaimed, the conviction surging through him like electric current. "No one wants a facade. They want to connect, to feel something genuine. She studied him intently, her arms dropping to her sides as if she were lowering her defenses. Honesty can be liberating, but it can also expose you to criticism, particularly from those who know you well. The acknowledgement felt like a challenge. I understand that, but perhaps every critique isn't aimed at diminishing my worth. Maybe some of them can help me grow. He hesitated, carefully weighing his words. Maybe I can use their insights to become better. Interesting perspective, Miriam noted, tilting her head. Growth doesn't come without confrontation, and you seem ready for that. But there's still work to be done, she continued, shifting the conversation to uncharted territories. I can still see remnants of that hesitation in you. You need to confront your narrative more deeply. Daniel felt an ache of recognition strike deep within. Was it possible that his confrontation with vulnerability needed to extend even further? He had glimpsed a nascent strength, a promise of authenticity. But could he be brave enough to probe deeper into his own insecurities and past? I'd like to challenge you, Miriam finally said, her voice steady. Take that bravery and apply it to something more personal. A series of writings or discussions that dig into your critique of yourself. Face it, test the limits of your comfort zone. The idea sent shivers down his spine. And if I fail? Failure is just another form of clarity, she asserted. You'll either grow through the process or find a lesson in what works or doesn't. Either way, you learn. Daniel's mind raced. Would this indeed be a leap worth taking? The path ahead was beginning to crystallize, a path of unearthing truths he had kept hidden for so long. All right, he found himself saying, a sudden resolve coursing through him. I'll embrace the challenge. As they parted ways, Daniel felt the shift within him, the exhilarating tension of possibility mingling with fear. He wasn't merely ready to challenge the narratives laid upon him. He was preparing to rearrange the entire structure of his professional identity. The weight of expectation loomed above like a storm cloud, but it brought with it an electric thrill. Would the challenge propel him into the light, or would it drown him in the depths of uncertainty? A visceral urgency took root. This step would push him into realms both known and unknown. And as he crafted the tentative outlines of his next venture, a burning question emerged. Just how much of himself was he willing to expose, and at what cost? Daniel awoke the next morning with a sense of purpose hanging in the air like the morning mist. The weight of the challenge Miriam had set before him coursed through his veins, invigorating yet daunting. The last remnants of sleep faded away, replaced by thoughts buzzing like frantic bees in a blooming garden. He inhaled sharply. As if to summon the courage to face whatever lay ahead, he opened his laptop, staring at the blank document titled Explorations of Self. The cursor blinked back at him, a relentless reminder of the journey he was about to embark upon. What would he write? What hidden truths were lurking in the shadows of his psyche? He considered what it meant to truly confront oneself. How could he spill his inner turmoil on the page and still claim worth? Daniel pushed back from the desk, needing a moment to clear his mind. He felt suffocated by self-imposed expectations, the resistance creeping back into his thoughts. Vulnerability wasn't merely about sharing. It was about exposing the raw edges of his identity. He felt an impulse to retreat, then a stronger one to plunge deeper into his convictions. He returned to the screen and began typing, allowing memories to drift into focus. First came the recollection of his childhood. The constant pressure to excel, the laughter of peers, the facade he circled around himself like armor. That tight knot of anxiety became his greatest companion, a silent agreement to hide his need for affirmation. Was that where this fear of genuine connection stemmed from? As he wrote, the words flowed unfiltered, stumbling through stages of grief and meditation over missed opportunities. What began as muted sketches of his past evolved into vivid portraits of talkative pain. He was unveiling himself piece by piece, yet doubt threatened to envelop him in its familiar grasp. Each sentence felt like he was stripping away layers of protection, inviting judgment, and risking exposure. Within the revelations of past struggles came the glimpse of a more profound realization. There was a period of rebellion, too, marked by defiance against societal and familial expectations. The moment he chose to question the path laid out for him. That's when a flicker of hope ignited. Maybe this was the Daniel he needed to reach. the one who stood firm in his authenticity. Yet, underneath that flicker loomed the specter of self-criticism. What if those who read his words found him weak? It felt like a dual-edged sword. On one side was the fortitude of his bravery, but the other could slice through his self-esteem, leaving vulnerability stripped bare in a cruel light. Frustration bubbled to the surface, and he shut the laptop with a thud, pacing his small apartment. Each step echoed with a mix of fear and ache. What would be worth exposing, and what remained locked behind fortress walls? He recalled Miriam's comment about confronting his narrative. Despite the resistance in his chest, he acknowledged the profound truth there. Perhaps, he thought, he could frame his experiences not as a plea for sympathy, but as a testament to learning. There was strength in recognizing that his belief in vulnerability could harbor growth. He inhaled slowly, coming to terms with his crumbling defenses, and sat back down. With renewed determination, Daniel opened the document again, this time focusing on embracing not just the fears, but also the unexpected joy that came with unveiling his core. He penned a new line. "This is not just my story. It reflects the raw beauty of shared existence." There was a budding clarity, and he felt a pulse of excitement attached to it. Perhaps those reading would not merely see weakness. They would see the courage it took to emerge in truth. But that clarity also revealed a broader challenge. How much of his inner dialogue would he transform into actionable growth for himself and others? The question throbbed at the forefront of his mind, already shaping the next writings ahead. Before he could fully grasp the implications of this journey, another thought twisted through the web of his motivations. Who would he trust to share this intimate narrative? Opening up would require not just honesty but deliberate choice in whom he allowed to witness his enlightening journey. The limit of vulnerability depended on the audience. The realization sent a jolt of uncertainty rippling through him. Was he prepared for the potential fallout of such exposure? The stakes were rising, and with that surge of tension came the awareness that he was on a precipice of transformation. He resumed typing. Excitement and apprehension mingled like contrasting brushstrokes on a canvas, each word an exploration of who he might become. But at the back of his mind lingered a daunting question. With every revelation he crafted, what would be the cost of this new honesty? And would it draw him closer to his ideal self, or push him further into the unknown? Daniel found himself pacing again, the restless energy pooling in his chest like a storm cloud on the verge of breaking. Each footfall against the familiar wooden floor echoed the growing dissonance within him. The blank document on his laptop was still there, a proverbial mirror reflecting the struggles he faced. The act of writing had transformed from a stressor into a crucible for change, hammering at the malleable material of his identity. He could feel the heat rising, shaping him into something new, but the thought of revealing that transformation filled him with trepidation. The compelling question loomed: who would read these confessions? Who would stand as a witness to this metamorphosis? His friends and family, while supportive, had never been presented with the unfiltered version of Daniel. He had meticulously crafted his image, a carefully sculpted facade to shield himself from the world. Now, what would happen if he thrust that persona aside, exposing the tormented core beneath? He sank into his chair, fingers poised above the keyboard. The cursor flickered, a metronome counting down the moments before he either seized the opportunity to be authentic or retreated once more into safety. With a deep breath, he began typing once more, intent on this narrative being not just an exercise in vulnerability, but a journey toward empowerment. "I long for acceptance born of honesty, not performance." This line materialized as he wrestled with the dichotomy of pride and humility. Would anyone truly accept him if they knew the extent of his struggles, the insecurity, the fears, the doubts that plagued him daily? How could he convey the years spent barricading himself in an emotional fortress, shaking off the callous judgment of outsiders? Daniel forged ahead, writing with raw intensity. His experiences morphed into prose that pulsated with truth. He drafted passages about moments when he felt utterly alone, even in crowds. A prominent memory washed over him, the time he masked his disappointment at a failed promotion by embracing feigned exuberance. The work was perfunctory, while the ache brewed beneath the surface. As the words filled the screen, a slight shift began to flicker within him. With each revelation penned, he was teetering on the edge of expansion. The act of speaking his truth became a paradox. Not only was it terrifying, but it also elevated him toward a sense of liberation he could scarcely predict. He was uncovering a latent courage, a previously unseen strength that could disrupt the carefully coded elements of his life. What sat before him was more than just written content. It was a living document of his evolution. Questions formed. How would he navigate relationships on the other side of this transformation? Would his authenticity alienate him from acquaintances who thrived on the polished veneer he had shown them? In the midst of this whirlwind of self-reflection, the intoxicating realization swept over him. Vulnerability could inspire connection. The tentative thread of doubt began to unravel, reweaving itself into a fabric of hope. His experiences, rather than signs of weakness, were stepping stones toward potential empathic dialogues that could enrich his future relationships. But just as clarity flooded in, doubt clawed at him from within. Would admitting weakness truly resonate with others, or would it expose him to ridicule? The stakes were impossibly high. Here, he contemplated the tipping point between liberation and despair, yearning to understand where this emotional tide would leave him in the eyes of others. As he fought through this tumultuous inner dialogue, a new thought intruded. Was it naive to believe that revealing his authentic self could cultivate deeper relationships? Perhaps he had traversed beyond simple writing, moving instead toward creating a roadmap for how he could build not only his narrative, but a new Daniel built on honesty and bravery. With an unexpected surge of confidence, he turned back to his laptop, fingers burning to compose the next passage, inviting this new version of himself into the light. But the lingering uncertainty wouldn't leave him. Lurking in the shadows was the moment of truth, when he would have to face those closest to him with this newfound honesty. What upheaval would follow once he chose to reveal not just who he had been, but who he was becoming? A chill cascaded down his spine, illuminating the fact that beyond this narrative, he was bracing for a reckoning, the inevitable confrontation with the past and present version of himself. Would he find acceptance in their eyes, or the dismissal he so desperately feared? The real test awaited, pulsing ominously ahead. Daniel stared at the glowing screen, the weight of the moment hanging heavily in the air. Each keystroke resonated within him, a heart-pounding drumroll leading him to the precipice of revelation. He was building a bridge from the darkness of his insecurities into the brightness of a potential new life. But the chasm before him felt vast. Would anyone really support this new and naked Daniel? As if drawn by an invisible force, he pulled himself up, pushing through the exhaustion that settled in his bones. The shadows of figments that had stifled his authenticity flitted behind him, and he could almost hear their sibilant whispers. Clenching his fists, he confronted the swell of doubt once more. Picking up his phone, he scrolled through his contacts. Voices from the past emerged, taunting him with echoes of who he had pretended to be. The thought of reaching out to anyone, telling them to expect something different, was nearly paralyzing. But petrified resolve sparked deep within this was the moment to surrender the tightly held reins of control. Stepping into vulnerability meant embracing the uncertainty and fear that came with it. He knew he had to lay the groundwork. Who could provide the initial feedback on this new narrative? Who might receive these confessions without the harsh scrutiny he so feared? His first thought was Colin, his oldest friend. In college, they shared everything: dreams, aspirations, the substantive vulnerabilities that only come with unfiltered youth. They drifted apart over the years as their lives took different trajectories, but Colin had always embodied an unwavering acceptance. With shaking hands, Daniel placed a call. Each ring felt like a countdown, an exhilarating tribute to his swelling courage. When Colin picked up, his warm tone sparked a warmth in Daniel that was almost untouchable. "Nah, man, you should just go for it. That is who you are, right? Authenticity is invaluable, especially these days," Colin assured him. The support felt like an anchor in the volatile sea of emotion. They talked about everything: Daniel's writing, his aspirations, how his perception of self was shifting. Each word exchanged fortified his resolve to continue the confessional project. As the conversation waned, Daniel took stock, electrified by the unanticipated boost Colin's encouragement provided. The next step crystallized in his mind. He would not only write, but wouldn't shy away from showing it to others. The act of sharing was no longer merely an obligation, but a privilege entrusted to a selected few. Encouraged by the moment, he decided to test his boundaries further. But what if he organized a small gathering? Inviting friends over to share snippets of his writing could create an intimate forum for honest dialogue. This idea lit a fire within him, spurring him to embrace the potential for authentic connection. Yet, apprehension quickly ensued. What if they didn't like it? What if his closest allies recoiled at the raw honesty of his vulnerability? The ticking clock resumed its place in his head, juxtaposing the urgency of his plans against the sobering thought of possible backlash. The invitation list began forming, and with each name, he grappled with excitement and anxiety. The prospect of standing before them felt monumental. Who would they see? The bravely redefined Daniel, or a misguided fool inviting judgment? Eventually, he hit send, each click echoing like a gun going off, and uncertainty permeated his chest. The path ahead was still fraught with fear and doubt, but he was ready to embrace whatever followed. The day of reckoning approached, and with it, a mix of hope and dread settled in. Would it bring acceptance or revulsion? Each heartbeat seemed to ask this question louder than before. The real test loomed just beyond the horizon, ready to unveil either a new paradise of connection or a tumultuous storm of despair. As the shadows of uncertainty lurked just beyond the coping skills he diligently crafted, one final thought flickered in his mind. What if this vulnerability unlocked unseen dimensions of himself that had long laid dormant? He was teetering on the edge of an avalanche, questioning if he could still run forward. Would the outcomes empower him further, or would they send him spiraling back into isolation? The next chapter awaited. Would he be ready to stand tall, or would he fall beneath the weight of his own reckoning? The days leading up to the gathering were a whirlwind of mental turbulence for Daniel. Each morning began with a sense of hope that twisted all too quickly into gut-wrenching dread as the afternoon approached. His mind churned with thoughts laced with self-doubt and agonizing what-ifs. Standing in front of the bathroom mirror, he scrutinized his reflection. Who was he trying to convince? The man staring back appeared fragmented, shadows etching deeper lines of apprehension into his brow. What if he was indeed just a misguided fool, unworthy of their time and attention? The voices of internal doubt rose like a chorus, mocking him, hinting that perhaps he should have kept his ambitions hidden, safely locked away from judgment. Yet beneath that mounting pressure, a flicker of resolve ignited. He had fought too hard to make it this far, hadn't he? The voice that broke through the noise didn't just resemble his own. It spoke with a strength he hadn't known he possessed. After all, this wasn't just about validation. It was about carving out a space for authenticity, wherever it led him. That on the day of the gathering, the sky outside hung heavy with gray clouds, which felt symbolic of his tumultuous emotions. Friends were scheduled to arrive at 7. As the clock ticked toward the hour, the ticking transformed into an echoing drum, pulling him back to the threshold of possibility. He busied himself with last-minute preparations, arranging seating and lighting to create an inviting atmosphere. A small dining table stood adorned with mismatched chairs. Each setting represented a unique history, a connection to the life he aimed to bridge, comfort marrying discomfort. As 7 o'clock approached, anxiety swirled like a storm, palpable and pressing against his chest. He paced, each step serving as a reminder of the precarious balance he was about to challenge, the meeting of expectation and reality. Could he truly expose the layers of his soul without losing himself in the process? His phone vibrated against the counter. The first few friends trickled in, faces familiar yet distant, the curtain of time having cast a veil over their shared past. Colin was among them, an anchor in this tumultuous sea. The initial chatter felt forced. Small talk was a flimsy facade veiling the gravity of what was about to transpire. Once everyone settled, Daniel took a deep breath. He could feel the weight of their gazes, expectant and curious. It was time to reveal the pieces of himself he had spent years trying to conceal. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice steady yet trembling. Each word seemed heavier than the last, the truth weaving itself through his narrative like an intricate thread. He shared his journey, detailing the fears and struggles that had shaped him, the relentless battle against his own shadows. As he spoke, he noticed their expressions shift, curiosity morphing into empathy. The tension in his shoulders began to unwind as he infused his words with vulnerability, the atmosphere slowly transforming from one of uncertainty to connection. After he finished, an awkward silence hung in the air, thick with the weight of shared experience and hidden truths. Finally, Colin spoke up. "Dan, that was powerful. You've always had a way with words." His encouragement felt like sunlight piercing through clouds. Hesitation swept through the room, but soon others joined in, sharing their own fears and aspirations. Daniel marveled at the unexpected dialogue unfolding. What had once felt daunting became a dance of authenticity, revealing not only the struggles he carried, but the collective human experience that threaded them all together. Yet, as the evening wore on, a flicker of apprehension remained. Was this cathartic revelation truly enough to propel him forward, or would the fallout ripple through his fragile psyche like an aftershock? As he wrapped up the gathering, a lurch in his stomach reminded him of the precipice he still teetered over. The consequences of his growth loomed like an unanswered question. Would acceptance emerge from this alliance, or would his confessions build walls that left him more isolated than before? The echoes of their supportive laughter danced in his mind, but a nagging doubt lingered. What was the next level of truth? The gathering was only the beginning, and somewhere deep within lay an even deeper discovery waiting to rise. How much further could he strip himself bare and still find belonging? Would his metamorphosis bring him closer to understanding, or would the depths of self-exploration lead him to truths he dared not confront? The aftermath of the gathering unfolded like the delicate bloom of spring flowers after a harsh winter. Daniel felt an unexpected lightness in his spirit, yet the heaviness of reality still clung to him. Each morning after, he replayed the evening's events in his mind, dissecting every moment, every word shared, looking for validation in their reactions. The validation he sought felt illuminating yet ephemeral, like trying to catch the morning mist with his bare hands. Days passed, and Daniel found himself more contemplative, walking the streets with a slightly firmer stride, emboldened by the acknowledgement of his vulnerabilities. Yet, the feeling of connectedness was threatened by the specter of fear. What if he had shown too much? What if they didn't truly accept him, but were instead mere spectators intrigued by the drama? The internal chorus swelled again, echoing the doubts he thought he had quieted. Seeking clarity, he turned to his journal, a refuge where thoughts didn't just collide but transformed, where ink spilled onto pages captured the essence of his journey. He crafted sentences that voiced his fears, but this time they carried the weight of realization. He wasn't merely afraid of rejection, he was terrified of losing himself again in the chase for approval. Writing became a ritual, a lifeline tethered to his evolving identity. As he wrote, he discovered insights that were startling in their clarity. He realized that his fear stemmed from a long-standing habit of placing others' perceptions above his own. Inwardly, he began to question whether this cycle was one he was willing to break. It was a tiny yet profound shift in perception, a dawning recognition that his path to authenticity must traverse through self-acceptance first. Colin checked in frequently, his voice a grounding force amidst Daniel's rising internal chaos. "You did something brave, Dan. It's okay to not know what's next. The journey is part of it," he would reassure, and each time his words echoed in Daniel's ears, they took root, prompting a new wave of contemplation. That evening, while pacing the living room, Daniel turned to his reflective mirror again. This time, he didn't see a fragmented figure, but rather a canvas of potential. A yearning coursed through him. He had shared his story, yet he hadn't yet explored what it meant to actively embrace the next step, sharing beyond the confessional comfort of friendship. Daniel began sketching ideas for a community writing workshop, a space not just for storytelling but for raw truth. The thought sent flutters of excitement, tinged with the familiar chill of apprehension. He envisioned a group, a collective like the one he had created in his home, where vulnerability was welcomed, and everyone poured their experiences into words, forging connections from the vulnerability of their narratives. He knew there were risks involved. Sharing deeper truths with strangers could expose him in ways he hadn't yet navigated. Yet an undeniable urge beckoned him forward. What he didn't know was how formidable the path ahead would truly be. The day of his first workshop arrived, and nerves coiled tightly in his chest, a band of uncertainty around his heart. Was he ready to embrace this leap? Holding his notebook, his shield, and sword, he stood before a small group of participants, each face an island of unshared stories. It took only a few moments for the familiar tension to grip him. Was this the time to peel back yet another layer and reveal the core of his own experiences? As he opened his mouth to speak, doubt flickered like a flame in the wind. Would he find the courage within him to lead this exploration of truths, or would he falter, succumbing to the self-doubt that loomed larger every time he attempted to step into his own light? The moment of truth loomed, daunting yet exhilarating. Daniel would soon discover whether this endeavor would fortify his journey or become yet another layer of introspection to navigate. What if embracing this communal narrative revealed not just a path for others, but a deeper understanding of himself that lay just beneath the surface? The room was filled with a hushed anticipation as Daniel stood before his small gathering of participants for the first community writing workshop, a vision birthed from vulnerability and the desire for genuine connection. Uncertainty coiled in his chest, but it was countered by a profound sense of purpose. This was it. He was no longer simply a history teacher whispering to the void. He was a facilitator of transformation, ready to lead others on their journeys of exploration. "Welcome, everyone," he began, his voice steadier than he felt. "Today, we're here to delve into the depths of our narratives. I want to share a piece of my journey, and I invite each of you to embrace your own stories, no fear, no shame." With each word, he felt the grip of anxiety loosen, replaced by an urgency to foster connection through honesty. Using his experiences as a foundation, he illustrated the power of vulnerability, not as a weakness, but as a testament to strength. He encouraged participants to write freely, without judgment, to confront the truths that remained hidden beneath layers of pretense. As they scribbled furiously, Daniel felt both elated and terrified, almost as if he were peeling away the layers of his own insecurities with each person in the room. During the workshop, participants shared snippets of their struggles, revealing the frantic quest for acceptance and the relentless shadows of self-doubt that haunted them. Each revelation became a thread binding them closer together. In those moments, Daniel realized that his journey was about more than personal validation. It was about crafting a tapestry of shared human experience, a community vibrant with the hues of truth. At the end of the session, something remarkable happened. Participants expressed profound gratitude, and several voices emerged tentative yet powerful, willing to share how Daniel's authenticity had inspired them. "You've shown us it's okay to be real," one woman admitted, her eyes gleaming with gratitude. "You've made space for us to be human." As the workshop concluded and participants began to pack their things, Daniel felt a wave of satisfaction overcome him. He had not only inspired others, but had also cemented his own transformation. No longer tethered by fear or doubt, he felt a palpable shift in his identity. He had stepped into his truth, leading others in a shared journey toward acceptance. In the days following the workshop, a newfound clarity settled over him. The urge to retreat into silence had all but vanished. Instead, he filled pages with reflections, transforming vulnerability into resilience. He understood that each moment of fear he once felt was now met with a fierce flame of empowerment. The deeper the burden, the stronger the lift, he wrote in his journal, a mantra reflecting his journey. With this clarity, Daniel sought to further his impact. He envisioned a series of workshops, dedicated not only to writing, but fostering a culture of shared experiences where one could confront their insecurities as a unit. The focus wasn't merely about storytelling. It was about connection, learning, and growing together. One evening, he stood at his classroom window, gazing out at streets bustling with life. This wasn't just the city beneath him. It was a web of narratives intertwining. He realized his role as a historian wasn't confined to lecture halls or dry textbooks. His legacy would involve forging pathways of understanding, drawing on both historical and personal narratives to engage minds and hearts. The last whispers of doubt faded as he drafted a proposal to establish monthly storytelling nights at the community center. He envisioned attendees sharing their stories, creating a safe space where vulnerability fostered genuine connections. Finally, on the day of his first official storytelling night, the thrill of potential coursed through him. Walking in, he recognized that the doubt he once battled had transformed into an eager enthusiasm. People filled the seats, bright eyes shimmering with curiosity. Daniel stepped up to the mic, feeling both the weight of responsibility and a lightness of being. "Welcome, everyone." He smiled, confidence radiating from him. "Tonight, we gather not as strangers, but as fellow travelers on this journey of life, each with stories yearning to be heard." The applause that greeted him was not for his teaching accolades. It was for his boldness to expose his truth and encourage others to do the same. With each story shared that night, Daniel became a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of overcoming insecurities and embracing one's journey. As the last story wrapped up, Daniel knew that he had not only conquered his fears, but had taken a definitive step into his desired identity. He was no longer an unrecognized historian. He had emerged as a recognized leader of emotional empowerment, crafting a new narrative that would reverberate through his community and beyond. Now, embracing his achievements with a heart full of pride, he realized that this was just the beginning of his journey, a journey where vulnerability met strength, creating ripples of understanding and validation in both his life and the lives of those around him. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. Comment your reactions and theories about the ending. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. You need to subscribe now. This is the moment to show your support. Don't wait even one more second to share.